Hello and welcome to our first official episode, I guess we can call it an episode, of PBIS training that we're offering here in Santa Fe ISD. I have a lot of questions still about what PBIS is, and I know that there's some curiosity about that, and a lot of people that feel like they haven't had enough training or they really, don't have the time to look into it too far, so they're kind of going into this blind, but I felt like this would be a good way for you guys to kind of get the information that we have for why we put this system in place and what we think it's going to help Santa Fe ISD with, and all those little basic things that we want to make sure that people can understand if they need that information. And so I'm just going to start super basic with what is PBIS in general, and then as we continue our episodes or our videos, we'll talk more about like what we're doing within Santa Fe ISD, and how it's working with our campuses. Right now, all of our schools in the district are working on either creating or implementing PBIS on their campuses. Everybody's kind of in a different place. We are calling the junior high a pilot campus for us this year, so they're getting to go through they're getting the trainings and all of that a school would get to start off with, and they're going through the system as they need to. And so we're kind of trying to pick up the things that might be helpful for other campuses, but also as we're building with other campuses, it's important to know that each campus is a little different, and so they're getting their own build on what they need at their level. So we'll move on, and you do have a place down at the bottom here to add some questions. And so when you utilize this system for professional growth, which is hopefully what we're going for, when we use the system for professional growth, what you'll do is you'll either answer the questions within the assignment portion of this page, or you can schedule a walkthrough from me or another one of the PBIS support people here in the district for you to receive credit for professional development here. If you're just here just to watch, that's okay too. You don't have to support anything. You don't have to send out, I'm sorry, not support. You don't have to answer any questions or schedule any walkthroughs. But I also am looking for people that are doing awesome things. So, if it's not that you need help necessarily, it's just that you want us to see, some cool things that PBIS has done for your room. So here we go, getting started. So I do want to say that positive behavior intervention supports has been around for a long time. It was actually first referenced by the U.S. Department of Education in 1996, which, if you're my age right now, you're thinking that really wasn't that long ago, but then you realize, yes, it kind of was. So 1996, and it was actually a portion of the IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, in order to make sure that schools were paying attention to the social and emotional needs of students when it came to behavior. So it wasn't just about a student having a behavior and not doing anything about it, or just punishing them right away or getting consequences right away. So PBIS came there. Now, what I do want to say is PBIS does have its own system, kind of like you would think of with CHAMPS or foundations or anything like that. But what Santa Fe is doing is they're working to make it their own. And so when it comes to the law, PBIS does not mean any specific program or curriculum. So it's kind of like Band-Aids and Kleenex, right? We know what that means, but it's not, it doesn't have to be a specific brand to be a plastic bandage or facial tissue. So it's just something that we call it so that it's easy to reference. Now, something else that we're hoping for with PBIS that has shown positive data gains in other districts since then is that we want to improve the behavioral and academic outcomes. And the way that we do that with PBIS, it is meant to improve the school climate and to prevent problem behavior by using the techniques within PBIS. Therefore, increasing the learning time, promoting positive and social skills with our students, for both inside school and outside of school, obviously. Also delivering effective behavioral interventions and supports. We all know that kid that them getting a detention doesn't make them act any different. So it helps us to kind of individualize what we do in order to make sure that they are increasing their learning time. That's our big one. So when you talk about PBIS, it's actually referred to as a multi-tiered system. I know that sounds crazy, but multi-tiered, not like a cake. If you're that's it's about lunchtime, so that's kind of what I'm thinking about. But anyway, when you think about multi-tiered, we talk about 3 different tiers within PBIS. This is the most basic one, and it was something that came out back then as well. But this graphic came from 2007, but it was just kind of a very basic idea of what the multi-tiered system looks like. Down on the bottom is the universal tier. That's universal, and that's tier 1. And then it goes to tier 2, where it's targeted behavior interventions, and then obviously tier 3 is intensive. You notice how the green kind of goes all the way through. Nobody ever loses their tier 1 behaviors. You don't automatically start treating a kid differently just because they're on tier 2 or tier 3. They maintain the same tier 1 support throughout any tier that they belong in. So a little bit more in depth on the tiers. If you look at this one, it gives you a little bit better breakdown. So when we talk about the universal tier, it's our biggest tier. We want anywhere from 75 to 90% of our students in there being serviced under the tier 1 interventions. Now, if you look at the tier 2, the selected, on this it says selective, these are at-risk students who normal stuff with them that you're doing for everybody else, that the pre-corrections and the positive reinforcements and stuff just isn't working. So we have to find something that's a little bit easier for them, or something that helps them to be successful within school. And so they have some different small group or individual strategies. And that's about 10 to 25% of our students. From there, we go into the more targeted and intensive students, high-risk students, individual interventions. That's about 3 to 5% of our kiddos. Obviously, we want to go the less percent, the better. So right now, looking at discipline data in Santa Fe ISD, everybody's already got this spread. And so it's really about just implementing the tier 1 strategies continuously, repetitively, to create the environment that we need to. So this is what PBIS is based off, this multi-tiered system of support. Now, just a little bit more in depth on the tiers. Again, remember, this is the informational video here. If we're looking at tier 1, and I'm going to pull up this graphic really quick so you guys can just remember what we're looking at for my visual learners here. Remember our tier 1 primary, our universal, where we want all of our kids to remain throughout any tier they're in. Hopefully more, like I said, the more in tier 1, the better. So if what we're doing in there is we're preventing the development of new cases or incidences of problem behaviors by implementing high-quality learning environments for all students and staff across settings. So this is school-wide, classroom and non-classroom, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So school-wide, we want no bad behaviors going on, and so there's ways that we have to get to that. Tier 2, or secondary targeted behaviors, are reducing the number of existing cases of problem behaviors that are presenting high-risk behaviors and or non-responsive to primary intervention practices by providing more focused, intensive, and frequent small group-oriented responses in situations where problem behavior is likely. That's a lot of things to say that if tier 1 strategies are not working, then we have to do something else. We have to figure out something else. And again, that can be a small group thing, or it can be an individual thing depending on the student. Then of course we go on to tier 3. We want to reduce the intensity or complexity of existing cases of problem behaviors that are resistant to and or unlikely to be addressed by primary and secondary prevention. So that's primary and secondary is that tier 1 and tier 2. And we give them the most individualized responses to situations where problem behavior is likely. So this comes in to things that you might see like timeouts and cool-off periods and different learning environments and stuff like that. And so as we get to those to those tiers, we'll give you more information about those. But what I want you to know is that when you first roll out PBIS, you start with tier 1 training only. And once you start making sure that your campus is ready for that and ready to roll that out, they get some time to do that. We don't go directly into offering Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. We just keep an eye on it and move from there. So anyway, I just wanted you to know that Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 are the basis for PBIS's system. All right, so what does success look like? Once we have a successful Tier 1, we'll notice that there's high-quality teaching and learning environments, that teachers and staff on a campus are directly and explicitly teaching social skills. You know, one of the things that they say all the time is that when a kid doesn't know how to read, we teach them how to read. When they don't know how to do math, we teach them how to do math. But when they don't know how to behave, they usually end up getting a consequence. We can't always end it with, we teach them how to behave. A lot of times the response is, they should already know that. Well, they may already know that. They should have already known that, but we can't ever determine what it is that they retain or what they are doing when they're not here at school, or how they're treated outside of school or anything like that. So you're still directly and explicitly teaching those social skills as they come up to be a problem. Monitoring their use of those social skills. Providing opportunities to practice in applied settings. For example, if your kids are struggling with going to the bathroom, then it's not a bad idea to show them as a class or in a situation, this is how I expect you to go to the bathroom. You know, you make sure you sign out, make sure you put the time here, make sure you walk quietly down the hallway, make sure that once you're finished in the bathroom that you clean your area up. No, don't leave any paper towels or toilet paper all over the ground or soap or anything like that. Make sure you wash your hands, make sure you dry your hands, just all of those different things. And you want to give them that opportunity to practice there. You don't just say, hey, when you go to the bathroom, do it right? Because as we know, anybody that has you know, shared a bathroom with somebody from the opposite sex, you know that not everybody goes to the bathroom with the same list of priorities. So anyway, not just to say that the bathroom is the only place on campus that we would deal with. Maybe your students are having trouble walking to the lunch line. Maybe they're having trouble you know, throwing their trays away at the end of lunch. Maybe they're having trouble when they go to a volleyball game or to a basketball game. You know, these are all different settings in which we expect kids to behave, but they don't always get the training that they need to. And the next one is giving specific and contingent encouragement and recognition when they are used. So here's the positive part, right? Because we want to make sure that we are positive with our students as much as possible, but it needs to be specific. And so what that means is you don't just say, hey, good job, you know, because you never know what they might have been doing or thinking, and you don't want to reinforce something that, you know, they don't understand why you did that, you know. So instead, maybe you have a kid that constantly forgets to write his name on the paper. So you say, hey, Johnny, I noticed you wrote your name on your paper. That's a great job. Thank you for remembering to do that today. And it doesn't have to be out in front of everybody because you don't want to be embarrassing, especially if, you know, other kids are like, oh my gosh, Johnny, can you remember to write your name? Well, sometimes it's a difficult thing for some people. Now, that is not to say that you give everybody specific praise for writing their name on their paper. You need to praise them at the bar that they're at. Praise them at the level that you want them to move to. Praise them at the level that they have been successful in, you know, that's something maybe they haven't been successful in before. So, you know, for example, I tell people this story all the time, but when I was in school, I remember that kids would get like stickers or pencils or something. People would just walk up to them and say, hey, great job, you know, here's your pencil. And I'd be sitting there thinking, like, why didn't I get a pencil? That's crazy. But then when I became a teacher, I was the first one to put stickers on people's papers that I always said, if it was 95 or better, you'll get a big fat sticker on your paper. And that's not always right either, because as I know from college algebra, not every 100 is, not every 100 is the only 100 that should be celebrated. In some cases, for me, it's, for example, getting a 70 on a paper was like getting 100. Like I could have been getting the Medal of Honor for getting a passing grade on an algebra test. So make sure it's specific and contingent on their status and where they are. All right, so moving forward, what we know is that in order for a school to successfully run PBIS, they have to do it across the entire school, like across the whole school, not just in the classrooms. So hallways, lunchrooms, assemblies, sporting events, field trips, playgrounds, libraries, any place you can think of that's considered what's called a common area, right? And so you would create rules for each of those areas that you would also teach to the students. From there, again, we have to make sure that to get success, that we invest in the prevention first from everyone on the campus. Prevention means that they are directly and explicitly taught. Remember, we talked about this before. Continuous progress monitoring, that's where the data comes in. We're going to be looking at office discipline referrals. We're going to be talking to teachers about the things that they're dealing with. Multiple opportunities to practice in applied settings. Remember our bathroom stuff, okay? But also things like, this is how you turn in a paper. This is how you pass papers in. This is how you do these things in the classroom. This is how you walk up the bleachers. This is how you walk down the bleachers. This is how you walk through the lunch line. This is how you don't run from the entryway to your classroom. Those sorts of things. But give them those applied settings where they see it in focus, instead of you saying, like, make sure you do the right thing in the cafeteria. Well, what does that mean, right? So the next thing is that specific and contingent encouragement, where we're praising them specifically. Great job writing your name on the paper, Johnny. I really appreciate that you got that done this time. And constructive reteaching. So we have consistent issues with something, you need to reteach them how to do it. And it's not, it might to them, depending on their age, be considered sarcastic or whatever, but really what you're doing is you're just trying to make sure that they really do understand your expectation. Okay, expectations are huge with PBIS, so make sure that the kids are very, very familiar with what you expect from them. Now, what we want to do, too, when we're talking about positive behavior on our campus, PBIS on our campus calls for a positive, structured, and this is the big one, predictable and safe environment for all students. I need to know that if I choose to do this, I have chosen this specific punishment. And that's something that Boys Town sent out long ago, right? So I know that if I'm speeding and I pass a police officer, I can get a ticket, okay? And I know that if I get a ticket, I could have a fine or have to take defensive driving, which is terrible. So this predictability right here is so important for PBIS. We have to establish and maintain positive relationships so all students feel like they're there, feel like they're connected to the school. It is important for them to have at least one adult. That's a statistic that's from long ago. I just read it, but they say if a student has at least one positive relationship with an adult, they're like 70% more likely to be successful, and that's a pretty good number. It's pretty good odds. The next thing is rigorous, effective instructions. We got to keep them engaged, right? But it also has to be not just in academics, but social and emotional and behavioral skills, so that they know what to do in life. So we need to teach them how to be good people too. Not that they're not getting it from outside, but maybe they're not. Okay, but our clear expectations in that predictable environment where it's structured and positive is going to be a good place for that. We also want to promote student agency in order to cultivate a sense of purpose, positive mindset, and motivation in students. We want them to take responsibility for themselves. So with PBIS, I don't want anybody out there listening to think that it means that there's no consequences. I'm not telling you to stop writing referrals. I'm just telling you to give them a chance to make the right choice and to relearn that behavior, so that, when you write that referral, it is your last effort. Like, I have tried everything else, making a relationship with this kid, this kid, contacting this kid's parent, moving this kid, giving them some wait time, trying to figure out what they need from me. Now I can't do anymore. I have to write them up. And then make sure all students receive the supports that they need to be successful. We talk about a needs-driven lens and framework. We need to know what kids need. Some kids need to type their papers. So if we force them to write on notebook paper with a pencil, that might cause a behavioral issue. So we need to make sure that we are focused on what do they need in order to be successful in an environment. So back to this, I want to talk a little bit more about Tier 1 support. When we look back at our tiers and that universal 75 to 90%, we want to make sure that we've integrated Tier 1 supports for all. That means we create relationships, positive relationships, with all students. There's the hard to love ones, I know, but you have support on your campus that can help you get to know them and create a relationship that's workable for you and them. School-wide PBIS, like we talked about, social emotional learning curriculum. In Santa Fe ISD, we have 7 mindsets going. That is super awesome, and we can bring that back to this system very easily. The next one is student agency strategies. How are we going to teach them to be responsible for themselves? In addition to proactive classroom management. This is the good behavior. So making sure that we are promoting good behavior at all times. That good behavior is a big deal to promote and encourage and give them positive reinforcement for. So this quote really hit me, right? Intentionally establishing, maintaining, and restoring positive relationships with all students. That means ensuring that all students feel a sense of belonging, trust, and understanding with the adults in the classroom. They need to know that their teacher cares about them. Okay? And again, just because you have to give them a consequence doesn't mean you don't care, right? All of us, have dealt with that person that has given us a consequence and we still care about immensely, okay? So make sure that they feel that so that they will buy into what you need to give them. So take a quick second and I just want you to think to yourself. You can add in the chat box if you'd like to. Why are positive relationships the foundation for influencing change and promoting internal motivation? We've talked a lot about positive relationships so far. Positive, 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 right? This does not mean that, you have to be in a great mood 100% of the time. I promise that, PBIS allows for people to have bad days. But if you have a continuum of expectations for the kids and being a predictable environment and you stick to that and they stick to that, then it's going to be fine, okay? But that relationship building is so big. You need to know your students. You need to try to get to know other students. Make them feel like they belong there. So each tier in the PBIS framework is comprised of core practices and systems that characterize specific interventions, strategies, and their curriculum selected and are developed by the implementation leadership team, right? And so across the tiers, practices and systems, increases in engagement, intensity, feedback, teaming, and monitoring are indicated. Similarly, though, supports for implementers also intensify as you move up through the tiers. The following stuff that I'm going to show you here is going to show you just some practices and systems by tier. So if you look at Tier 1, we talk about these things over here. A leadership team with an active administrator participation. Efficient routines, schedules, and structure for conducting those meetings. Commitment statement for establishing a positive school-wide culture. Procedures for ongoing database monitoring, evaluation, and dissemination. Procedures for selection, training, and coaching of new personnel. And procedures for evaluation of personnel related to PBIS implementation. Those are things we have to have in place in order to be successful in Tier 1. Practices that we have to have in place, though, are set of school-wide positive expectations and behaviors are defined and taught. Most of us do a really good job of defining them and teaching them at the beginning of the year, but we tend to taper off as the year goes on because we expect, oh, well, we've taught them that already, we need to move forward. Well, just like you would want to review from the beginning of the year for the end of the year test, the concepts that you covered, these kids need to have that information to be successful moving forward. Procedures for establishing classroom expectations and routines that are consistent with school-wide expectations. Continuum with procedures for encouraging expected behavior. Continuum with procedures for discouraging problem behavior. And procedures for encouraging school-wide family partnerships. Okay, so those are all practices that in order to be successful in Tier 1, the experts say need to be in place. For Tier 2, you have to continue in the systems with all Tier 1 systems. So whatever you did in Tier 1, you need to keep doing in Tier 2. But then we talk about an intervention team with a coordinator for Tier 2. You have a Tier 1 team, now we have a Tier 2 team. Behavioral expertise. When we have people that need that individual support or small group support, we call on our behavior experts. People that are associated with the PASS program, people that are involved with behavioral expectations for the district, those sorts of things. Increased precision in data collection related to implementation fidelity and progress monitoring, make sure that we are continuing to look at that data. Formal process for screening and identifying students in need of more than Tier 1 support. Access to training and technical assistance on Tier 2 practices and supports. And again, remember, Tier 2 doesn't start right away. It's something that once you are using Tier 1 supports with fidelity, that we move on to Tier 2. Same with practices. We keep all of our Tier 1 practices from above in the slide before this. Increased instruction and practice with self-regulation and social skills. Increased adult supervision. That might be like a check-in, check-out process. Increased opportunity for positive reinforcement. These are the kids that you start doing the good job on turning in your work, good job on making sure that when you turned it in it was neat, good job on throwing your trash away in the cafeteria. You know, things that you feel like they should know, you want to find reasons to compliment them. Increased antecedent manipulators, so that's pre-correction. So if we're getting into group work or we're about to start an activity or we're walking into the classroom, make sure that you pre-correct that person for the behavior that you have seen. Increased precision to minimize rewards for problem behavior. Increased access to academic supports. So these are things that kids on Tier 2 would need to be successful and that a school would need to be successful in Tier 2. Tier 3. Remember, this is a very small percentage of your students. But when we look at the systems in place, Tier 1 and Tier 2 stay in place. Multidisciplinary team with coordinator based on individual student need. So we have a third team that comes into play on the campus. Behavior support expertise remains. This could be a new person or somebody that works with both Tier 2 and Tier 3 kids. Formal data collection plans related to implementation and behavior intervention plans. Formal collection and use of data related to the impact and support plan of student outcomes. These systems are crucial to making sure Tier 3 is implementing correctly. These intensive practices are tailored for the individual student. This is not a small group session. This is an individual, let's get this stuff in line, okay? Tier 1 and Tier 2 practices are all included in practices. Comprehensive function-based assessment, including functional behavioral assessment. This is something that you do once you're looking into higher accommodations and modifications that might be necessary for that student. An individualized plan of support that includes strategies for prevention, teaching, positive reinforcement, controlled reduction of natural rewards for problem behavior, and safety. So we're going to really flesh out how do we support this student. And then wraparound supports and culturally responsive person-centered planning that actively involves family and community supports and resources. Making sure that this kid is supported not only in the school walls but outside as well. All right, so in order to create a program on your campus, what you have to do is establish 3 to 5 behavioral expectations. Again, the junior high has already done this. The elementary schools tend to do this naturally, but they're working on different levels on that. So they create or have created these 3 to 5 behavioral expectations. From there, We do regularly scheduled teaching and instruction of those expectations. We have a cueing system to prompt and remind students to exhibit those expectations. Don't forget, the expectation is, don't forget, we want to do this. Reinforcement system to promote behavioral expectation. This is a reward system of sorts, and so you would have to come up with your own school reward system, whether it be tangible items or experiences or something like that. You'd have to decide that, but that's part of the system creation. This is an example from Antonio Gonzalez Middle School for their expectations: having a positive attitude, use good judgment, maintain respect, always be safe, and succeed. At the junior high, we have respect, responsibility, and effort as our expectations, and everything drives from there. So remember, we talked about the common area expectations based on these school values here. This is an example from West Montana Middle School, living the West Montana dream. You see over here they have their expectations written out over here, and then within each of the areas, this is what that looks like. Notice that within here there's 2 to 3 rules for each area in how they can be encouraging, and how they can be respectful, and how they can be determined, how they can accelerate, and how they can show manners, or accountable is what that says. How they can be accountable and how they can show manners. And so theirs spells something out, yours does not have to. But that's what they want to do, is they want to create these expectations or these values, and then from there create rules for every area in the building. All right, so we talked a little bit about different strategies you would use, to help with Tier 1 interventions. And this is, remember, Tier 1 is an intervention that every single student on your campus will get, regardless of what tier they're in. But again, Tier 1 is your 80, 75 to 90% of your kids that are getting Tier 1 stuff. And so this is not every single one, but this is a good place to start if you start thinking about, well, what does it mean to be Tier 1? Okay, so the first part you kind of break it down into is relationship strategies and procedural strategies. When you're dealing with students on your campus, you want to make sure that you are, not make sure, but something that you can do to be helpful is that 4-to-1 ratio of positive to negative interactions. With 4-to-1 ratio of positive to negative interactions, you're looking at every time you have to correct a student, there's 4 more times that you redirect them in a positive, specific manner. Another one, smiling and being nice. It makes a big difference. I don't know how many people have come into my office when I was an administrator and said, she's never happy. They're not happy people. I don't understand, just because they're angry. So you want to really project that happiness. Positive greetings at the door to pre-correct and establish a positive climate. We're meeting at the door, and it's not just a, hey, how's it going? Hey, how's it going? Don't touch me. Leave me alone. It's a, talking to them about, what should they be doing. So don't forget to pick up your paper on the way in. Don't forget to do your warm-up. Or just, hey, Johnny, how was your baseball game last night? Those sorts of things make a big difference in your discipline. Communicating competently with students. That's, again, knowing your students and what they need. Talking to them in a way that they can understand you. Wise feedback, they look to adults to give them advice from time to time, whether it be on their academic assignments or with life. So making sure that if they do ask you what to do, knowing an answer that can help them and be helpful to them. And then that non-contingent reinforcement. It doesn't have to be that, it's something that they did right then, right there. It's not contingent on anything else. It's just that I wanted to let you know that you did a great job today working on your assignment quietly. Those sorts of things. It doesn't have to be just because. Procedural strategies start with pre-correction. This is reinforcing the procedures that you have in your class, reinforcing procedures that you expect in the hallway, in the lunchroom, all those things. Don't forget that when you get to lunch, you need to make sure you walk to the lunch line. Make sure that you smile at the lunch lady. Remember to do this, so that they know and that you reinforced it. All of them might not hear you, but if one of them does and it makes a difference, that's a big deal. Organizing a productive classroom. So having things to do and take up the time between bell to bell. Doing engaging things that make them excited to be there. Providing numerous opportunities to respond. We don't want to be in a classroom that somebody's just talking at us the entire time. Give them an opportunity to show you how smart they are. Ask questions on tests at the end that say, what didn't I ask that you knew about this topic? Those sorts of things make a big difference. Classroom rules, expectations, procedures are visible and known by every student. I used to have a teacher that would quiz his kids on what color pen they should use on different things, and what color highlighter should they use, and those sorts of things. And the kids knew them. They knew the procedures, but they also knew they were going to be asked about them. So make sure that the kids do know them. Teach, model, and reinforce behavioral expectations. This is a pretty easy one. Making sure that we are showing them how to behave. Transitions are managed well. So if you're moving from activity to activity, make sure, number one, that they know the procedure for that. But number two, that they're not giving too much time, or that you allow certain people to have certain behaviors and others to have others. Again, predictability in the environment. Independent seat work is managed and used when needed. Teacher proximity and mobility. Class-wide motivation system to reward desirable behavior is a good one that you could use. Goal setting and performance feedback. This is on your T-test, so this is a good place to use that and to show the kiddos some growth. A visual schedule of the classroom activities. A lot of us do have an agenda, but some things like timers and other things, just making sure it's visual so that they know what to come next. That also helps if it's activities that they can move to. Maybe they finish early and they know that after this I need to do this, and so giving that a visual schedule. Effective cueing systems to release and regain attention. That's your things like raising your hand, having the callbacks to your class, those sorts of things that if the kids need to get out, get back into line, that this is how I do it. Clap twice if you hear my voice. Raise your hand if you hear my voice, those sorts of things. This is an example of the junior high cheat sheet for this stuff. All that stuff that we just talked about. These are all Tier 1 interventions that you can do while you're in there. Of course, it has our values over here on the right, and then it just gives some examples on what they can do in order to redirect a negative behavior. So that is the brief version, not super brief, but brief version of what is PBIS. Now, remember, to earn credit for this for professional learning, you do need to either answer the questions in the assignments portion of this or schedule a walkthrough for your classroom with me using my email address that I have listed on this page as well. It is Melissa, MELISSA .ward, WARD, at SFISD.net. So again, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to post them, send me an email. But let's schedule a walkthrough, let's answer some questions here, and let's move forward with positive behavior in your classroom. Thanks.